When the solid gold Apple Watch was announced, alongside the original Apple Watch lineup, I thought it was ridiculous like most people. I'll admit I was laughing hysterically. I thought, Apple, what were you thinking? How could you do such a thing? It's since, of course, been removed, and I think that in hindsight, as more years have gone by, and I've looked at the price of those Apple Watch editions new, I realized that people who bought it, while we all memed them and said you were an idiot for spending that much money on a first-generation Apple Watch that was more than likely gonna get discontinued in a few years, they actually had a pretty big brain move. Let's begin. So I know the obvious reason most people don't think it's worth it to spend $10,000 or more on a gold Apple Watch, but let me just say some of the most obvious things so we can clear our heads a little bit. It sounds crazy because Apple Watches are pretty much identical in features in software from, you know, a $300 model or a $200 model, and that $10,000 or $18,000 model didn't really offer any differences, but I will admit that Apple, of all things, did not invent the gold watch. There are luxury watches out there, and Apple, of course, wants to be associated with the luxury look. They want to be looked at as a luxury brand, of course. Instead of having gold watches now, we just have $700 wheels, but as stupid as that may be, I understand Apple's viewpoint. You know, they weren't trying to just sell gold watches. Obviously, they sold aluminum and steel models that were far more reasonable and far more popular, but just for the sake of wanting the Apple Watch to be looked at as a luxury timepiece, I get it. You know, they're not going to sell in high volume, but they wanted to sell fairly high-priced watches that were using premium materials that you could not find very easily in other smartwatches. I have yet to see Samsung or Google do much similar in that regard. But then the follow-up question that I see most people always bring up is, yeah, but this is a tech product, okay? Gold luxury watches last for many decades, and people will buy them as investments. They'll hold their value. Some will, of course, even appreciate over time, so people just buy them even though they could sell them and actually make money off of them, or just kind of like fine wine, see how long they can hold on to it and how much it'll be worth in a few decades. Whereas the Apple Watch is technically, you know, a computer on your wrist. After a few years, it's not going to support the latest version of watchOS, and then once it gets discontinued, which that original gold Apple Watch has, now the watch is pretty much pointless, right? It serves no purpose after that point. And of course, there's new Apple Watches with new features and new health sensors and better displays coming out every single year. So yeah, my Series 6 that I paid a couple $100 for is miles faster, miles better, and can do far more than that $18,000 watch from a few years ago. But at the end of the day, what I've picked up on is the fact that Apple still is kind of looked at as a luxury brand. Despite making more affordable products, they do still retain this nostalgia factor. There's so many YouTube channels and Apple museums across the world that have done their best to collect every piece of Apple hardware throughout history, and particularly the rare ones, the hard to find ones, are what end up costing a lot. That's what ends up selling at auctions for extremely high prices, and similar to those rare Apple items throughout history, and as we've seen the Apple Watch take over the world, become the #1 watch, not just smartwatch, but #1 watch seller globally, and seeing it exponentially get more and more popular among iPhone buyers, it's really shook Apple's whole future of wearables by making Apple Watches. There's actually been a whole lot of value in collector's items that has been brought to those solid gold Apple Watch editions because they're incredibly hard to find. They do not go on sale on eBay or Amazon or wherever you try to find those solid gold Apple Watch editions. They're really, really hard to locate. And what I've noticed after years of scanning for them, not that I'm interested, I'm just curious, is that anytime they do go up for sale, they are not selling for substantially less than what they were worth at launch. In fact, most of the time they're selling for more than they were at launch because, of course, Apple doesn't make them anymore and they're very rare. There were several reports that the sales of the solid gold Apple Watch edition flatlined after just a couple weeks. So I totally get why Apple got rid of it, because when they first announced the Apple Watch and people were unsure with the future of watches, plus the original Apple Watch was fairly problematic. It was not water resistant. The CPU on board was very, very slow. The display was quite small. There was all kinds of problems with watchOS, and I don't think the world was convinced in that first wave of Apple Watch shipments that this was going to be a hit, that this was going to be the future, and this would end up being the #1 watch in the world. I think the Apple Watch team and watchOS team has done an amazing job making the hardware better, making the displays better, bringing more health sensors, making the CPU faster, and making them last a lot longer, to the point that watchOS 8 is still even coming to the Series 3 Apple Watch, which is coming up on 4 years old, and they're still giving it software support, and they're still even selling it at $200. I feel like the narrative of Apple Watches has changed quite a bit since 2015, and because of that, these solid gold watches are very hard to find, and the people that did buy them are able to sell them for about the same price they paid, if not more. I have not seen very regularly anyone selling their solid gold Apple Watches for anywhere less than what they paid new, and essentially what it means is, as much as we mocked them and joked about them like, look at that idiot, he spent $12,000 on his gold Apple Watch way back in 2015, now it doesn't get software support. Well, now that guy is selling that watch for about what he paid for it, and now can use all of that money to buy 10, really good Apple Watch editions if he wants to. Or he could hold on to it, and over time, these solid gold Apple Watches will probably get even higher in value because they're very hard to come by, and anybody who wants to collect them or have that piece of Apple history in their inventory is going to be willing to pay quite a bit for them. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that Apple should bring them back, because I'm definitely not interested in buying one. I don't want to have something of that much value attached to my wrist. I just feel like it would put a target on me in public. And also, Apple makes, steel gold watches now that look very similar, so if you're just going for that goldish luxury look, there's much cheaper ways of doing it. Plus, there have even been a lot of luxury brands that will specifically resell every new Apple Watch and give it gold plating, so the watch chassis itself is not made of gold, but it is coated in gold, and they typically sell those for around $2,000 a piece, and they've actually had pretty good success with those. I've seen several luxury brands that make solid gold plated stuff say that they would sell up to like 8 gold Apple Watches a day for $2,000 a pop. So those will be made in volume, and I don't see those appreciating in value much over time, but simply because the Apple Watch market has changed a lot now. It's become so popular, and Apple has made the CPU and the GPU on the watch scale much better and able to support many, many generations of updates. I'd be very, very curious if with the Series 7 or Series 8 they tried to go the solid gold Apple Watch route again, which frankly they were very, very profitable. If you go back and look at how much, just the Apple Watch weighed and how much actual physical gold Apple was having to buy to make these things, the manufacturing cost of those Apple Watches was probably somewhere between $2,000 or $3,000. So they were selling them for, a $7,000 to $10,000 profit margin. So yes, they're low volume, but they account for an extreme amount of profit for Apple. So there's probably a certain amount of engineering and security and complications that go into just the process of manufacturing those gold Apple Watches, and maybe that wasn't worth keeping around. So totally get why Apple would not want to keep making them, especially if sales flatlined that quickly. But I have a feeling if they launched one again, they would not flatline so fast, and with the impact the Apple Watch has had on the world, I bet there would be far more people interested in buying them if they did launch them again, and also buying them, holding them for many, many years so that they could resell them probably at the same price or more than what they paid for them when they came out, even if they don't have the latest watchOS version. It's not about the fact that the watch isn't running watchOS 8, it's the fact that it's rare, it's unique, it's hard to come by, and not that many people bought them. So I think it'd be fascinating to watch Apple try again with this luxury item, and I get that it's not a highly requested feature, it's not something a lot of people would bring back. I just think it's an interesting piece of Apple's history if you consider most Apple Watches do not have a great resale value. Most of the time you buy one and then a year later if you try to sell it, you're only gonna get like half what you paid, and if you wait 2 or 3 years, you're gonna only get like a quarter or less of what you paid. Whereas people who bought those gold Apple Watches, they can get even more than they paid. So it takes time, it doesn't happen right away, but for those collector's items out there, it actually kind of makes a lot of profitable sense for Apple, and it even somewhat makes investment sense for people who are willing to buy it. No financial advice here though, don't take my word for it, I don't know what's gonna happen. You'll probably be much safer just investing in the stock market, but feel free to let me know how you think of the gold Apple Watches out there, and let me know if there's any solid gold Apple Watch owners out there from 2015. Do you guys still have some? Let me know. Tag me on Twitter. I want to see pictures of these things. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.